Let's have a look at lofts in the 3D Tiny House Designer. So to get started, I will click on the loft button here in the interior section of my library panel, and I will select a loft panel. So once I have selected it, it will pop into my selection. Of course, currently my walls are enabled, so I can't see the loft panel. So I'll just quickly go inside. There we go, and here's my loft panel. Now, before I keep placing more things, I will just quickly disable my walls here so it's easier for me to see my loft. And let's go into the best use cases for loft panels. So to design a regular loft, most of the time you have a loft that spans the entire distance or the entire width of the tiny house. And to do that, we will first of all want to push it into the side here, for example. And I just did that by typing 0 into my setting panel. And now we will want to make sure that it's the same width as well as the interior of the tiny house. So my dimension move tool currently shows me it's 3'10" wide, and my width here at the moment is 4 foot. So if we want to make it the same width, we will want to make it 7 foot and 10 inches like that. Perfect. Now the loft panel has been resized, but because it resized into both directions, it's currently sticking out on one side of the tiny house. So if I'll enable my lofts again, you'll see it stick out on this end. And what we can do, we can either just use the dimension move tool to type in 0, or we can click on it and just move it. And once it moves, once it understands, oh, it needs to be back inside, so it snaps back into the middle of the tiny house. Perfect. And now you can see on the both sides it is 0, meaning it's perfectly stepping to both sides of the wall. Now we can change the length of the loft panel as well. And the same thing applies here, of course. My loft panel is kind of sticking out on the other side, so we'll just quickly move it. And now I've pushed it all the way to the end. Now it's snug with the side of the wall. One quick thing to keep in mind when you're moving loft panels, the movement of the loft panel is at the ground floor of the tiny house here. So I would recommend when you're moving the loft to hover your mouse over the ground floor. If you're hovering it over on the outside of the tiny house, it will not move, but if you're moving it over the ground floor or even on some of the walls here as well, it will still move. Alright, so that's how loft panels work. This is a very simple setup. So for example, you would just have a loft panel and then you would have your bedroom above, so you would just place a bed above that, and then you would have your bathroom here below here, for example. So one thing to keep in mind when you are designing a loft or tiny house, you want to make sure that you have the right head clearance. So to make sure that that applies, first of all, we'll look into my settings. So we'll see the thickness here. Currently that's set to 4 inches. You might want to change that if you, let's say, have a thicker framing setup. That would include framing and the underside and the lining, of course. And then below that, we now have a ground clearance of 6'5". So I'll just quickly bring this back to 4 inches here like that, and we'll see the ground clearance change automatically. So this is a little helper showing you how much space you actually have below the loft panel. So the ground clearance you can't change, but you can actually change the elevation. So if you want to change how far the loft panel is from the ground, you can change it in here. So let's say we want to make sure that the top of the loft panel, this part here on the top, is, let's say, 7 foot away from the ground. We can just type that in here, and you can also see the ground clearance update accordingly. So just as a quick reminder, this is the distance here from the top all the way to the bottom, which is just about 7 foot like that here. All right, so that is the regular use case of a loft panel. Now let's say if we want to add some walls below it, we can just place them in here like this. And one thing to keep in mind when you are placing lofts and walls together, make sure that the walls actually extend all the way up to the loft. And because we have changed the height away from the default, we now have a ground clearance of 6'8" rather than 6'6" what we had before. We actually need to go in and adjust the height of this wall as well to make sure that it actually fits in here as well. Alright, so that's how you would place lofts above walls. And one other thing to keep in mind, if you want to design a more intricate loft setup, you can actually use drop lofts as well. So to do that, we will go into my lofts again and we will use a walkway. So walkways and drop lofts are exactly the same thing, it just depends on how you want to call them. And they basically are exactly the same thing as a loft, only that they are not as high as a loft. and usually you can walk above them at full standing height rather than having to crawl in a loft. So if you have an intricate design, so this is how you would extend the livability of the tiny house, by being able to actually walk into your bedrooms rather than having to crawl into it or take a ladder up to it. So let's say we want to have a drop loft that extends past all the way into the back of the tiny house like this. There we go. And we want to reduce the width of the loft here and have a little upstand. So I'll show you how to do that. Let's have a look at how wide this loft panel is here, for example. So at the moment this is 2'8" wide, and we'll want to reduce the width of this loft panel by 2'8" to get started. So we'll make this first of all 5'2" like that. There we go. So now we've reduced the width, and now you can see that it kind of, this ends right where this loft panel starts. But if you think about it, we want to have a little nib wall that sits on top of that. So we actually want to extend it out by an additional 4 inches, which is the thickness of the wall that you would place below it. So now we can go into my walls and grab a wall panel like this and move it all the way to the edge. And now you can see it's lining up. Of course, at the moment it's still way too high, so it's kind of like glitching through the loft panel at the moment, but we can now reduce the height. So let's have a quick look at how tall this space is. So it's roughly 2 feet. So let's quickly change the height from 6'6" to 2 feet. Okay, it looks like we're actually quite a lot too high still. So we'll maybe add this to 1'8" like this, maybe even 1'9". There we go. There we go. Okay, perfect. So the distance between the loft panel and the walkway is 1'9". And now what we can do, we can actually extend this wall to go all the way to the end of this loft as well, to keep it in line. So we know that this loft panel is 7 foot long. So we will make this wall also 7 foot long like this, and then we'll move it over, and now you have a setup where you can have a drop loft and a sleeping space up above. Of course, you can now go in and add another wall here as a balustrade, for example, and this loft here of course is 5'6" wide, so we'll make this 5'6" wide as well. Ooh, 5'6", there we go. And then we can leave it as like a little nib wall, or we can even attach it to the roof as well, to make a proper room. And now we can go in and add a bed here, for example. I'll go into furniture in another tutorial, but let's say we can just add in a bed here, and now we have a little sleeping nook that you can actually fully walk into. One thing that I've just seen, once I have added this walkway in the loft, we can see that the roof angle is actually facing this way, even though my walking part of the tiny house is on this side. So we actually want to make sure that we have more head clearance on this side than on this side, because it doesn't really matter here because we're going to be sleeping anyway over here. So what I will do, I will go into my roof and I will rotate my roof around like this, and now it has flipped my roof by 180 degrees, meaning that the high part of the roof is now on this side, meaning we now have more walking distance. One last thing that we want to make sure as well, once we have designed a walkway, that we actually still have enough space to walk in it. So let's have a quick look what we have here. So at the moment, the walking, or the height on this side here is roughly only 5'5". So if you're a short person, this will work. But if you see that you still need more space, you can actually drop this loft down even further. So let's say we'll drop this to 4'6" like that, and now we have a little bit more space. But of course we still need to go in and then move this wall here down as well. So we'll just quickly reshuffle this until it's in the right spot again, like this, and then we'll need to add a little bit of height of 5 inches that we've just taken away, like that. So this should be 2 foot and 2 inches like that, and now it extends fully all the way up. And now if we measure this again, we will see that we have roughly 6 feet here, which is a little bit nicer than having a 5'5" space, which you kind of have to duck under, if that makes sense. All right, that's how the lofts work, and I will see you in the next tutorial.